Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 2018-19 Annual Business Plan and Budget Public Meeting. My name is Martin Cooper. I'm the General Manager of Corporate and Development here at the City of Burnside, and I will be your chair for this evening's meeting. I'm joined on my right by Karishma Reynolds, who's the Group Manager of Finance and Strategy. Barry Kant on my left is the General Manager of Urban and Community, and Michelle Kennedy on Karishma's right is the Group Manager of Assets and Infrastructure. Our facilitator tonight is Bernie Orecht, who's over on our far right. Bernie is the Strategic Community Engagement Officer, and she's ably assisted by Megan Tate, who's the Community Engagement Administration Officer. I would also like to take this opportunity of acknowledging some of your councillors who are here this evening. On my extreme left we have Councillor Wilkins, Councillor Ford, and over in the gallery in the corner we have Councillor Monceau. So thank you for attending this evening. I welcome all members of the gallery to this meeting and ask you to observe and respect tonight's proceedings as the City of Burnside's administration presents the draft budget for the year. There are several offences that address behaviour that disrupts a public meeting, and should any person or persons disrupt this meeting this evening, I will issue them with a further warning, asking them to treat this meeting with respect and to immediately cease such behaviour. If that person or persons fail to comply with my warning, I will ask them to immediately leave the meeting. If the persons or person fail to comply with my request, security will be directed to escort the person from the chamber and, if necessary, to call the police. That person can be removed under Section 18A2 of the Summary Offences Act. I would like to take this opportunity to remind members of the public in the gallery and elected members that all meetings are recorded and will be uploaded through the City of Burnside website. Should there be a fire or other emergency, the alarm will sound and you are asked to follow the directions of council staff. Without further ado, I would like to hand over to Bernie to provide a brief overview of tonight's proceedings. Thank you, Bernie.
Thank you, Bernie. And good evening, everyone, and thank you once again for taking time out to attend this meeting. Just as Bernie mentioned, we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. So if you could jot down your questions as we go along, I'll be more than happy to answer them at the end of the presentation. Just a quick overview of the purpose of this presentation tonight. The first thing we are going to provide is a budget overview of next year's financial performance and position. We'll also discuss the cost of business for Council to deliver its 118 services. We'll touch on the achievements for this year so far and also highlight the achievements we're hoping to achieve next year in 18-19. We'll outline the capital and operating projects that are proposed at this stage for next year. We'll have a look at our rates information and compare some of our KPIs to some neighboring councils. And then we'll talk about where to from here, so the next steps in this process. In terms of our city, a quick snapshot from the 2016 census shows us the key demographics for the city. When we devise the budget every year, we do consider the demographics of the city. For instance, you'll notice on the slide up there, there's about 16% of households in the city of Burnside with young children. This indicates to Council that there is a need or demand for playgrounds and infrastructure, open spaces. There is also indication of income earned and mortgage payments, which again indicates to the Council the affordability of the community. The largest increase in ancestry is Chinese and Indian, and it is also a multilingual community, which helps us understand the effective ways to communicate with our community and also helps us with our customer service. The projects and services which are provided by the Council ultimately are those that should be considered valuable by the community, and the demographics certainly help us ascertain, to an extent, what those are. The key budget process and highlights will be discussed next. So just to recap on our budget process so far, so as most of you are aware, the budget process is quite a comprehensive process which spans over 9 months. So every year this process starts in around October and concludes in June with the adoption of the budget. So the workshops are held starting from March with the elected members, and just a reminder that all of these workshops are public workshops, and I would highly encourage all of you to attend the next workshop, which is on the 12th of June, just so you can be privy to the discussions held in those workshops. Attending these workshops, of course, affords the opportunity to the residents to be involved in the budget earlier on. The presentation from tonight's workshop, as mentioned before, and from the previous workshops, will all be uploaded online. Can we show it? I do apologize for the dramatic music. Oh, it's still there. Can we lock it? Well, hopefully the music ceases for a bit. Not as we go. If you can write down your questions, we'll attend to all the questions. You can write it down and then we'll come back to it. Only because it's disruptive. It's disruptive. We just want to, you can record it.
With respect, Mr. Green, we'd ask you to hold your comments until the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Just as a reminder as well, as Bernie mentioned earlier, there are, within your packs, there is about 30 questions that have already been answered. These questions were raised in the previous 2 years and will address some of the questions you're raising. And we've done that again to avoid duplication. We've preempted some of the questions that could potentially come out. But as mentioned, please make a note of it and we'll definitely answer them at the end of this presentation. So going back to the annual business plan process, so the first part of it is aligning the annual community survey to the draft budget. So we undertake a survey every year in November, and we ask a number of questions in that survey which help determine the direction of the budget. Without going into all the details, for instance, this year we asked about the themes which were of high priority to the public, and the Build Burnside theme came out on top. As a result, we've put around $15 million capital works in the next year's budget. Participatory budgeting, which has also been another theme and was in line with the previous discussion we were just having, was also a high priority item. As a result, Council have included a draft project to do with participatory budgeting, which will help explore the options to Council to engage with the residents earlier on. Placemaking was another recurrent theme, and we do have a project for placemaking grants in next year's budget. As you're aware, the annual budget is always a balancing act. There is an opportunity cost for the decisions we make, and those are in terms of rates, debt, services, or projects, or even maintaining of assets. There are a number of competing priorities, and Council always determined to keep the best interests of the ratepayers in mind. Ultimately, it is a Council decision, but we have always strived to keep rates low and maintain our assets and provide a high number of services. Just a quick recap on the key challenges for the coming year. Of course, most of you would be aware that there is a potential of rate capping being introduced. We also have a savings target of about $590,000. This is the third year of our savings target that is self-imposed, and it's 1.5% of our rates target. We impose the savings target on Council just to be able to keep the rates low, and I'll touch on that a bit later on. There are some major additional cost pressures as well next year, which are going to impact Council's expenses. Primarily the China waste ban, which you might know is a ban on recyclable produce, and China will not be accepting a number of those. We have been informed that the impact would be around $400,000 at this stage. However, that might fluctuate. There is also the solid waste levy, which, if you recall, was levied by the state government, and the impact on Council for next year is around $104,000. We've got the upcoming elections, and we've also got some grant funding that is reduced next year. Just to recap, there is a fine balance between Council rates and services, and we do try to maintain a financial sustainability, and we focus on effectiveness and efficiency to deliver these services. One of the main, points that we focus on is to ensure that the rate increases for the residents don't have peaks and troughs and are quite consistent. We do this by determining the cost of Council business. So what you do is you start with a cost index, the local government price index, which is the cost index which measures the basket of goods which are more appropriate for local government. And then you add to it the future known cost pressures that you're aware of for next year. So as you can see through our calculation, even though the cost index is 2.9, which is a historical cost index, what we do is we forecast what it's going to cost for next year, and that has come in at 4.2%. When we did the same exercise last year, our prediction at that stage was the cost of business would be 2.88%, and the actual index has come in at 2.9%, which just validates that our theory and our basis of assumptions is quite on the mark. However, even though the cost of business is 4.2%, Council is able to declare a rates increase of 2.7%. The reason is, again, the savings target, and we are hoping to cover the shortfall through achieving those targets. Again, this is the third year that Council has aimed for this target, and for the previous 2 years, we have successfully achieved them. Another reminder that the local government price index was 2.9% in December, and Council rates are 2.7%. Quickly, just some budget achievements to date. So 17-18, which is the current year, this was the second lowest rates increase in over 10 years. We achieved our savings target of $560,000. There were no reduction in services. We are on target to achieve our adopted budget surplus of $1 million. And we have so far this year spent $10.4 million on capital upgrades and replacements. Following on, some of the budget highlights for next year. Again, the 2.7% rates increase in spite of the 2.9% index. No reduction in services. We have an operating surplus of just under $500,000. Target savings level of $590. And we've got $4.7 million in new capital, $10.3 million in renewal and replacement of capital, and also just under $500,000 in new projects and new services. The debt position at this stage for the end of next year, 2018-19, is $15.8 million. Just moving on to some financial results, comparisons, and project information. A quick snapshot of our financial position shows that the major reliance on revenue for council is from rates, which makes up 84% of total council revenue. And this is followed by contributions and grants, which is about 8%. Majority of the expenditure for council comes from employee costs, materials, and contractors. And as you can see there, we have an operating surplus of just under $500,000. The capital expenditure donut shows $4.7 million being spent on new capital next year and $10.3 million in renewal of capital. Council, if you could just hold on to your questions, Jim, make a note of it and I'll come back to it. Thank you. The draft financial indicators again show that we are in the green for all of the indicators for next year. The council pays particular focus on net financial liabilities ratio and the debt to total income ratio, which is effectively measuring what our debt levels are. And for both of these ratios, we're well within the target range. For debt to income, the audit committee has set a target limit of 50%. We are forecasting 34%. And for net financial liabilities ratio, the target from the LGA is 0 to 100%, and we're currently sitting at 47%. So again, reiterating the affordability of the projects next year. Few assumptions that we've used for the draft business plan. Of course, we've got the savings target in there, so in the event that we are not able to achieve that, that will reduce the surplus. There is no change in rating policy, so there's differential rating only on vacant land, not on commercial properties. There is no change in staffing levels, so the staffing levels are maintained at 160.9 full-time equivalents. There's no change assumed in any of the grant funding, and the growth is assumed at 1%, which is primarily from Glenside. Lots of numbers there, but it's just a quick comparison of what we had in the long-term plan that was adopted last year in November and what we've got in the draft 18-19 budget. So the rates in the long-term plan were 2.5%, whereas we've opted for a 2.7% increase, and that's primarily because of the movement in the cost index. The main ones to focus there are the operating surplus, which was budgeted at that stage just under $1 million, has now come in at $500,000, and that's because of the waste ban impact of $400,000, and the debt levels, which at that stage were projected being just under $16 million. And after last night's Q3 review, we are now projecting it at $15.8 million, so just slightly under what we had in the long-term plan. The next few slides are just going to take you through some of the operating projects and the capital projects that we are proposing for the next year. So we've got $400,000 in operating projects and new services, and this includes a few projects like the Canopy Action Plan. We've got the community participation events, which lines back to the feedback from the annual community survey. It's got placemaking grants, again, that was mentioned before. Local history and cultural officer. It's got the effectiveness and efficiency project as well. With the capital project summary, so we've got again, as mentioned, $4.7 million in new capital and 10.3 in renewal of capital. And this green table there shows the consistency with our long-term plan. The next two slides go through all the capital projects. This one here is all the new capital projects, which amounts to 4.67 million. Includes some research on a skate park, again aligning back to the annual community survey results, which focused on some youth activities. Has the McGill Village redevelopment, the Brownhill Keswick Creek project, which we've now formed a subsidiary. We've got, of course, the new footpath, new curbing. We've got a small amount in there for Era Water, connection costs. And as mentioned before, we've got an amount in there for the participatory budgeting process. For renewal and replacement of assets, we've got $10.34 million. It's really important to renew your assets in line with the condition levels of the assets, otherwise there's a risk of having an asset backlog. This year we've got $10.3 million budgeted, which equates to about 90% asset sustainability ratio, which shows that we're replacing the assets in line with their useful lives. Again, as usual with prior years, we've got footpaths, curbing, bus shelter renewals, streetscape signage renewal, fencing renewal, etc. There's a number of new renewal projects in there as well. And as usual, we've also got civic center, reserves, parks. Now, just to take you through some rating information and some benchmarking with some other councils, just to give you an overview of the local government landscape. Now, general rates and how they're calculated. Essentially, what we do is we determine the total rates to be raised. What we then do is we get new valuations from the State Valuation Office. We combine all of the values of the rateable properties, and it's a very clear division of the two, which gives us a rate in the dollar. Now, of course, for the residential rates, for example, if that's the rate in the dollar, the vacant land rates will be 150% of that. Then you consider the value of your property, which again is not a decision by council, it is decided by the State Valuation Office, and that's how your general rates are calculated. So it's essentially the value of your property times the rate in the dollar. The rating history for Burnside shows in the previous few years we have tracked very closely to the LGPI, which is the Local Government Price Index. So the green line there is the Local Government Price Index, and the blue line just above is Burnside's rates increase. So this year, of course, we are 2.7 and 2.9, and as you can see, we've managed to be pretty close in the previous few years. Now, how do we compare with our proposed rates with the other councils? So as you can see, we are about mid-range compared to 12 other councils, with Norwood being at 1% on the lower end and Prospect being at 3.5% on the upper end. Now, I might remind you, all of these exclude growth. What's also important to consider is the cumulative rates increase, and that's over 5 years. So what we've done is we've taken the 5 years rates increase for all of these councils and showed you a comparison. Again, Norwood being at the front end, at the lowest, with 10.7%, and Prospect being almost 20% for the past 5 years. Average rates. The average rates are basically what rates are paid by a median household in the city. Burnside has an average rate of $1,752 compared to West Torrens, which is only $1,181, and Walkerville, which is just over $2,000. But it's important to know that the average rates is also very dependent on the number of properties, the property valuation, and quite often does not provide a like-for-like comparison. To assist in comparing where we're at, what we've done is taken the rates in the dollars for all the councils and provided to you a comparison of what a ratepayer would pay if they had a $700,000 property in each of these council areas. As you can see, Burnside comes in at the lowest, followed by Playford, Adelaide Hills, and Tea Tree Gully comes in at the highest, based purely on their rate in the dollar. With regards to debt, Burnside is fourth from the bottom. So Campbelltown have absolutely no debt, and Playford has loads of debt. Burnside is sitting at $15.8 million. But again, just looking at debt in isolation is not valuable and does not provide the right comparisons across councils. What we have done is taken some feedback we got last year around the graphs and provided a debt level by rateable property graph, which shows you what the debt is per property in the council area. Again, Campbelltown have nothing. Burnside, about $750 per house per rateable property, and Playford, just over $4,000. So next steps from here. So after tonight, the budget consultation period is still open till the 1st of June, so please feel free to provide your feedback and comments. There will be an elected member budget workshop on the 12th of June, which I do encourage you to attend. And finally, there will be the adoption of the budget on the 26th of June. Once this budget is adopted, we will be delving into the long-term plan for 18-19. And as mentioned earlier, with the participatory budgeting project, we do need to do some research on the best way to engage with the residents. Now, how can you have your say? There's a number of different ways you can provide your feedback through tonight's session. You can fill in the survey forms that's in your pack. You can email our Burnside account. You can post in your surveys, or of course, you can provide information via the internet. Thank you for listening, and I really do appreciate that everyone's held on and waited for this point to ask questions. So fire away. This is going to be the most exciting time. Thank you all.
Before we start, just you get to have a say if some of you have a question, some of you might have 4 or 5. We'll just do a round through of everyone's first question, then we can come back and follow up with all the other ones as we go through, make sure everyone gets a say. If you don't feel comfortable asking a question in this sort of forum, happy for you to write it down and give us a question later on. All the questions that are asked are all going to be recorded by Megan. So everything will be, all the answers will be written out and put on the website for you to have a look at by next Monday. If you left us your email address, we'll email you a copy of the questions as well. So, yeah, ready to go? Cheers, thanks.
My question's fairly fundamental. How is tonight's meeting publicised? Because I guess the reason I'm asking the question, I think the turnout from the community is pathetic. And I want to know the reasons why and how was it publicised?
I can go certainly, if I can take your details, we can make sure that we investigate as to why you're not being focused as well, because we use the same sort of delivery method with focus.
It's not a couple of Andrew's statement because we haven't had a courier for some time.
Sure. Well, can I just answer that then about the courier?
And it's about time
So we
put a notice in the courier like you used to.
we don't manage the courier messenger, so their delivery is their delivery, but they certainly have never approached us about how to deliver them. They've actually had cutbacks themselves. So you've probably been led astray there. We prefer that they were warned and they're delivered everywhere because they're a good means of communication. So if you can see me later, then I can give you details. Who's got the next question?
Well, I'd just like to reinforce what the gentleman has said. Yeah,
Sorry, not if you're later.
yeah, no. I just think our strategic engagement is appalling, and like my issue is about the long-term plan, which I was promised to get involved with by yourself. And I asked the question about the budget development process, and I said, I was told that it was passed by council last night. But that's all we know about it. Tonight, by your presentation, and I might have thank you for it. It's very clear. We can't get involved. Because we don't know. And if you're fair dinkum about the budget development and involvement of the community, you've got to involve them at a basic level, even line budgets and things like that. And I just think that I raised this issue last year, and I think the signals are there that you can do it better, a hell of a lot better. And I'll just go back 10 years, and I'm sorry for that, but this particular council had one of the best budget development processes with its community, because they engaged on a voluntary arrangement about 5 or 6 accountants or financial managers, starting with the head of the CPA, a chap called the late Peter Agars, and they convened a meeting, and it was much more informative, and you could get involved in it. And I don't know why the hell, with all the accountants in Burnside, why we aren't doing that sort of facility. And you can also use the audit committee to do that, but you better go outside. And I just think it can be improved a hell of a lot, and people can be more engaged. And tonight is evidence that people are not engaged. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for your comments.
Anybody else? Sorry, I'll come back to you.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment and concur with that. We haven't had a queue for 12 months. We don't have any, sticker on a letterbox, so don't jump hard with that. The other thing was the timing of tonight's presentation meeting. I think it was in the queue about 3 weeks ago. I did see it, and that's how I picked it up. But could it be more attuned to, just before, like this week's or even last week's, so that it's coming up and it's immediate? Otherwise, you sort of lose people. It's there and it comes and goes. And so that's just a comment. But my actual question was a question you did anticipate was about legal fees. You mentioned here that with the adopted budget was for $362,000, but due to some issues in the chamber, the budget was revised to $747,000, and that's over twice of what you expected it to be. You do have some issues in the chamber. Can you explain what those issues were?
Thank you for your question. Thank you for your question. I think you'll find all of the information that you seek is actually online, and we're not here to explain that this evening. We're here to look at next year's budget. Thank you.
What are you here for then, apart from sitting there smiling? Yeah, first one, thanks. I have a number of them, but I'll just do the first one. What is the proportion of social security recipients in the city of Burnside as a percentage of population, which I notice don't even write a mention, and yet clearly they're the single most curve on recurrent expenditure. And how much over and above inflation has their pensions gone up in the last 5 or 10 years, whilst you've been barely increasing yours at twice the rate of inflation?
Mr. Jacobson, I'm afraid we actually don't understand your question, so put it in writing and we'll deal with it later. Mr. Jacobson, put it in writing and we'll deal with it, but unfortunately we actually don't understand your question and it's probably not relevant.
Can I just ask, what proportion of the population in your neighborhood?
Thank you, Mr. Jacobson. You've received your answer. Please submit it in writing and we'll do our best to respond. Thank you.
Boys and girls, but keep going. Thank you.
Mr. Green, this is not about why we're going wrong. The reality is there are questions we cannot answer right now. So respectfully, if there is a question that we cannot answer, we would like you to put it in writing and we will provide a response in writing to the public when we can. Simply as that. It's not about avoiding the question, Mr. Green. Mr. Jacobson.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Can I hand back to Bernie? Thank you.
Dave Monsell, just a question about Brownhill Creek upgrade. What's Burnside's total commitment to that likely to be? What sort of 9-11 million was the last forecast? Is it still that sort of level, or have you got an exact figure?
We've got a few different models at the moment, so it depends on the length of the funding, but at this stage we're looking at a 20-year program, 20-year funding, which is just under the $10 million. The total project is 150 million.
Thanks, Benny. A couple of months ago, I got a letter through the post to say that there would be an impost on people who pay their rates quarterly. And it was supposed to be, the letter said it would happen from the second instalment, but nothing's happened. And I just wondered whether you are still pursuing that policy.
I don't believe there was any notification of impost for paying quarterly. What you might be referring to is the hard copy fee of 50 cents. Is that the right? We have withdrawn that, so there was no charge on any of the residents, and there will not be a charge in the future as well.
None of the state government people apply that, and the then Minister for Local Government was appalled that you were doing it.
It would have been nice if you just told us as well that you'd withdrawn that. 50 cents.
My question is, regarding the budget process, there was a step for community engagement in that. Could you just flesh that out a bit? How many households or people were consulted? How were they selected? Was there a percentage feedback, or was it 100%? I'd like to just know a bit more about how that community consultation has get into the budget process and how effective it is.
Are you referring to the annual community survey part that feeds into the budget? Is that? Yeah, so it's how we feed the feedback into the budget.
Bernie, could you just elaborate on the process with the statistics? And I'll
so every year we do what we call the annual community survey, which looks at satisfaction with council services and also asks questions around what services people would like to see or ceased. And so all that information that we receive gives us statistics on, So it's a random telephone survey done by a market research company, but we also offer an online chance. So if you don't get a call and you still want to have a say, you can as well. So that's all the information that's gathered by that market research company, and they provide us with the raw statistics, which then the team, corporate services, review and feed that into our budget or proposals. Or it can guide what sort of projects we decide to bid for based on what the community would like or not like. Next step.
Thank you, Bernie. So as Bernie mentioned, we used the data from the community survey and we informed some of the budget aspects. So for instance, in the slide up there, you'll notice for footpaths, 56% of the residents, or the respondents, I should say, were satisfied with the footpaths and the maintenance of footpaths. As a result, what we did this year was we reduced the funding on footpaths because there was a high number of people satisfied. On the other hand, you'll notice that there was 81% of respondents were in favor of a shared community space. And again, we're looking at Kensington Gardens master plan, looking at the Conyngham Street Depot. We looked at that last night. So what the results we get from these surveys, we keep that in mind as what the community is requesting or the services that they demand, and we then translate that into the budget each year. As mentioned earlier, youth services came in with 72% who wanted something more to be done on the youth. And we're looking at skate park. We've got some funding in there for community projects which are directed mainly at the youth and the family demographics of the city. So that's how we go about aligning the feedback we get to the budget process.
I just wondered how much money is in the budget for the, I call it an impost, but the parking fee, the residential parking, how much money is going to be collected from that?
Based upon the recently adopted policy, the new policy for next year, we anticipate, although it's difficult to get exact numbers at this stage, but we anticipate between $5,000 and $10,000 revenue coming in to offset the costs of producing those permits.
Dave, myself. I see a project in my suburb, Mount Osmond Road landslide works. Can you tell me just what that is? It's minor works, I guess.
We commissioned a report from an engineer earlier this year to do a risk assessment up that way to identify any risks around landslide and stuff. They came back with some recommendations of some works that should be done. So some are some further investigation works, some are some minor remedial works. So that's what the budget bid is for. It's to implement the recommendations from that consultant's report.
I know the figure of debt of about $15 million. What other debt is held by council through other authorities like Eastern Health, East Waste, Highbury Landfill, the water, ERA, and also the Granville Creek exercise? Is there off what I call, in my terms, off balance sheet debt that we're holding a liability for due to our involvement in those organisations which are either cooperatives or subsidiaries?
I might take that one on notice and provide it through the website. I'll just have to look at the subsidiaries' balance sheets to be able to determine that, which I don't have at this stage. Thank you for the question. With regards to the percentage, we would have to ask the mayor or the LGA directly if they would be able to provide that information. With regards to the second part of the question, with the relationship with the LGA, that's again a council decision. But last year we did have a look at the benefits provided from the LGA with respect to Marion's exit, and we did find that through the LGA procurement, we did get quite a few benefits through the contracts that they provide us. So at that stage, it was still beneficial to be with the LGA. Internally, that's what we thought, but again, it's a council decision.
Russell Peck, I'm a regular at the library, and I picked up the draft business plan yesterday from the council chambers. I can't work out what the budget of the library is and whether it's going up, down, or nil. So can you please give me some indication?
With respect to the capital budget for the library, so that would be the books, the library books, it's always the same amount, so it's consistent with previous years, and I believe it's about $260,000, and it's been consistent for the past few years, and that's all the library books, DVDs, materials. Yeah. From the operating perspective, the recurrent expenditure, there was no change that I'm aware of. There was no need for any change.
How much is that?
If you
I look at some of the figures, and because of 0 to 100,000, 100 to 200,000, it seems a funny way to write a budget, put it that way.
Understand. The decision to take out the amounts was made a couple of years ago, and the reason was for procurement reasons, so we didn't want to give out the budget beforehand. And I'm more than happy to tell you what the figures are at this stage if you'd like to know of any of the projects, but we did make a conscious decision to keep the project budget amounts out of any public documentation. And again, in your packs you'll see one of the questions I've addressed that as a response, because that question had come up in the prior year as well. Grant, can I take your library cost on notice? I'll provide it on Monday through the website.
Dave Onslow. In the balance sheet, there's an item, equity accounted liabilities in regional subsidiaries, 1.9 million this year and 1.9 million next year. What are the major items involved?
Thank you for your question. That equity accounting relates to the Highbury Landfill Authority. The reason it is consistent with this year's figures is because we didn't have the draft budget for next year from Highbury.
Thank you.
Just looking back to your annual community survey, what questions are you actually asking people that you draw these corresponding conclusions from? In other words, you talk about shared community facilities.
Sorry, I've just pulled up the community survey in front of me. So the question you had around shared use facilities, the question that was asked was, council has been involved in developing community spaces that can be used by both community groups and sporting clubs, for example, at the Glenunga Hub. Would you like to see council develop more facilities like this? So they were quite specific questions. The other comment you had was in relation to footpaths. We've reduced the new footpaths from $500,000 a year to $400,000 a year. It was a little bit based on this. It was also based on our program of works this year, where as we've been surveying residents to ask if they want a new footpath put in place, we're having a number that are coming back not supported. And so we've realised we don't need quite as much money for next year for new footpaths as a result.
So when are you planning to put a walking track down the side of Mount Osmond Terrace that can actually get from the top to the bottom?
Hang on, I don't want one.
Okay, just one at a time. So we'll hear Jim's question. Is there any answer for that? No? Okay. David, do you have a question? No? Any other
I like
questions?
the bush tracks up at Mount Osmond.
No, so do I.
Everyone wants that question.
And the council has put in a small footpath as well.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Long-term debt. Yeah, I understand the budget and the 15 million or something like that. There are a lot of people outside the Burnside Council, in other councils, and also other information that comes to me which suggests that the long-term debt is going to skyrocket. And
Oh, close to the roof, maybe.
blow to the roof, all right. So I just wondered if you could offer some comment on that, because I think the budget, the way it presented, is in good faith. I don't have any problem with that. But somewhere in here, you know, I think you've got to pull your skirt up, so to speak, and show what the situation is down the track in terms of the finances, because that will have impact on rates in the future.
I'm not quite sure what you mean by skyrocketing. Are you talking about the level of debt or the interest that's charged on that debt? I'm not sure. Well, if I can refer you to the long-term financial plan, that's what we, how we manage those projections, and it's clear for everybody to see.
Well, is it readily, it's not readily available? Yeah.
Yes, it is. It's publicly information, and it appears on our website. I can send you a link for that tomorrow if you like.
Send me one as well.
Well, I prefer a hard copy. I can come and get a hard copy.
I'll arrange a copy to be at the customs service.
All right, thank you.
Christian, can you send me one as well?
Yeah, just wondered what strategies are being put into reducing wastage. Like case in point was at Recurrent Terrace, where we spent $60,000 to put down a chicane and restructure the stormwater network, and then we dug it up and it cost us about $130,000, so there's $190,000. So there's a big opportunity cost there for the community that could be going to community facilities, projects, and frankly, you know, those organisations that need it. I just wonder what is the strategies to reduce that sort of wastage.
With respect, we don't see that as being wastage. We had a council resolution in place to put that work into situ. That's what was done. Obviously, there's we have to take into account all of the feedback that comes around that, and then the decision was made to remove that. So we wouldn't call that wastage at all. So thanks.
Thank you. First of all, I congratulate the Mayor for his third year in a time in a row of non-attendance.
Well done. Well done. He's really interested in this.
Yeah. As I missed out on the opportunity to do questions off fire off duty in line. Well, first of all, some comment about the promotion of council workshops. Well, I suggest the very first move is
Thanks for your comment. Noted.
We all get it because I am also on the list of forgotten customers. Now, the first question is,
You can correct it with the IGA.
now the thing is, you've gone to a bit of trouble to talk about debt.
Excuse me, please. Sorry. Thank you.
You raised the point of talking about debt, but you don't mention about how much debt interest we are paying out.
Thank you for the question. The debt interest is 413,000 projected for next year, 18-19, and that's in the draft business plan financial statements.
That's a lot of money to waste. It's dead money.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. There's another question waiting. Thank you.
Zero debt.
Lady waiting here to talk. Thank you, Alan. Back to you, second one.
Thank you. I'd just like to make a comment. First of all, the fact that I did actually get a letter in my letterbox about this meeting. That's why I'm here. But I think the reason that there are so few people here is because most of the residents of Burnside feel that the council is doing a good job. That's, otherwise they would be outside with placards. So that's the main thing. Another thing, I'm a resident of Victoria Grove, and so for the first time in 40 years I'm actually no longer a ratepayer, but that's what we have the Glenside development coming up, and I see you make note of it. Talk about 1% increase in population, I suppose, and I hope that the council is keeping a good eye on that development. It's prime real estate. Of course it's got to be developed. I'm not complaining about it, but you need to keep an eye on the green space, where the facilities are, all the extrapolations of such a big increase in population. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Yeah, mine's most of sorry to ask so many questions, but mine's a follow-on from that question, but more general about open space. The residents of Dulwich and the associated area are poorly treated with open space. I think there are 3 little pocket parks, maybe 2 now. And that's apart from the 5 or 10,000 you've got to collect from residential permits, which is going to be a big issue, and an expensive one for the council. The other greatest concern, probably the primary one, is the lack of open space. Now, I think it must have been about 3 years ago, maybe 4, we did spoke to the mayor, and the mayor did the political thing, I suppose, and was going to talk to the Lord Mayor about our use of the Victoria Park. Now, I'm pretty certain he didn't speak to the Lord Mayor, but I'll bring it back to the question: what is anything included in the budget for improving the open space in the Dulwich Toorak area?
To respond to your question, I was going to say through your worship, force of habit. I can't think of anything in particular with respect to increasing open space within Dulwich and Toorak, and I'm assuming that's what you're getting at, Ron. So, simple answer is none. That's correct. Council hasn't made any decisions with respect to any of those, and they will be considered by the future council if and when it comes up.
So what's on the agenda?
For disposal of assets. Dulwich would be the only one that council has a standing resolution, and the future of the Dulwich Community Centre is pending the new council coming in, and they'll present that at that time. Laurel Avenue has been presented in the past. They are considering they have adopted that will improve the Conningham Street depot to incorporate a men's shed and a nursery, and at a future time the council will consider the future use of the Laurel Avenue nursery.
Is there a resolution to that effect?
Yes.
The next question, you had under additional cost pressures, the roads to recovery is going to cause 343,000 additional cost pressure. And I'm just wondering, given that we've been recipients of road recovery grants over many years now, how that is suddenly going to be an additional cost pressure.
This year we had just over $600,000 of funding for roads to recovery. Next year we've got only about half of that, which is why it's shown as a cost pressure, because it's a reduction in funding from last year. But we are still getting funding for the coming year.
So the question that follows from that obviously is roads to recovery ties to specific roadways. If the roadways, if they're not funding them, why are we building them? In other words, they give us money to build specific roadways, right? You're not getting the money this coming year. You're only getting half of what you got last year. Therefore, why are you building additional roadways at the council's expense instead of waiting for the next input of roads to recovery fund?
We don't build any additional roads in Burnside. I can't remember the last time we built roads. We improve them. So at the moment, our roads to recovery funding is predominantly used for upgrades to existing roads.
So again, you haven't answered the question. Why are you continuing to upgrade roads when you don't have funding, at least a reasonable portion being delivered by the council?
The roads to recovering funding is used to offset our asset renewal programs. So with roads to recovery, we're able to renew an additional amount of road assets that we...
Thank you. They are specific, they are tied grants. But I think the reason it's shown as a cost pressure here is because they're recorded as an operating income and they're spent in a capital expense. So when you're looking at just the operating surplus, similar to the financial assistance grants as well, it's the same treatment of the income. And that's why it's showing up as a cost pressure, because in 17-18, the cost or the grant funding received would have been 600,000. For next year, we're showing a decrease of 300,000, hence it's a cost pressure. In the operating section, you're right in saying that we don't then spend the capital, but then that comes into net operating surplus. It's just the semantics of where it's sitting in the operating statement.
But it's only semantics and it's not actually cost pressure.
It has an impact on the operating result, is what you're saying, because it comes into the grant on top.
I appreciate you lose the income, but you don't have the expenditure either.
Next up, Alan's got a question next to us.
Yes, 2 years ago I asked a question in relation to installation of LED lighting in the boundaries of the Burnside Council. It's been remarked upon as being asked last year as well. Now, in the copy of the messenger that I did have to go and collect, I'll read out what's there from the Mitcham Council. Did you know that street lighting is the single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions from the local government? To address this problem, we are upgrading over 5,000 street lights with new LEDs, which will provide a better light and use less of energy. By replacing our street lights, we will save $293,000 through reduced energy consumption and maintenance costs, and lower our greenhouse emissions by 600 tonnes per year. And then they say refer to their site. Now, in addition to that, a short time ago I went to the SA Power Networks Research Centre, and I was informed that Campbelltown are about to embark on the installation as well, because with someone there from Burnside County, from the Campbelltown County. Silly question. How many LED lamps have we installed in street lighting in Burnside in the last 12 months?
I can get you the exact figure, but it's not huge at the moment. We have been, any lights we've upgraded in the last, certainly in the last year, we've upgraded with LED. So our whole program of works this year has been using LED lights. We had a report go to council a couple of months back where council resolved that would bring back a further report that gave a business case for upgrading all of our lights to LED, all of our public road lights to LED. So that's due to come back to council within a month or so, and should that be endorsed, then we'd be looking at a bulk upgrade similar to what Mitcham and a number of other councils have been doing to replace all of our street lights with LED.
Because I'll tell you right here and now, it's not a problem in South Australian Power Networks, because they will have to not worry about getting electricity to generate, because LED is so much more efficient that it can actually reduce the necessity to generate.
I agree.
That's what I would also do. Did you want to say anything? Come back to you.
Just you mentioned about cost pressures, and I know General Manager Burns has mentioned about the commodity industry side. We had like a 100 years violent storm some years back, and we put a lot of that debris, wood and so forth, using as perhaps a transfer station. I just wondered if we've got a draft master plan about the purpose side. Where's all that at? We do have one, but because of the pressures of climate change, that we're getting more of these events. And I'm just wondering what provision are we making for where we store all this stuff, or is it going into the parks, or what's happening there?
The adopted master plan still accommodates a operation site, and it's been deemed large enough to cope with all of our operational needs.
Last year I asked about the incentive to pay rates annually, and mainly I lived in West Australia for about 9 years, and they get competitions, discounts, and the answer here is administration will conduct a cost-benefit analysis to provide an incentive for paying up front. If beneficial, this will be presented to council for endorsement. That was 12 months ago, so it has to be done.
Thank you for your question. We actually did do an analysis 2 years ago, identifying if providing an incentive to the ratepayers would be beneficial, but it turned out that we would need at least 50% of our ratepayers to pay in advance to then equate to a break-even point. So at that stage, we didn't think it was beneficial, and the ratepayers did not need an incentive to pay annually upfront. But certainly we can do another one for next year just to make sure if anything's changed, we can capture that.
What about other councils? Is it done around that one?
I can't recall at the top of my head, sorry, but I can provide the response through the website on Monday.
Yeah, well, I know you're going to do another survey this year, or another cost-benefit analysis of it. Is that what you're saying?
Another cost-benefit analysis of paying upfront, the rates balance here.
Yeah, I've run before myself at another council, and it does work, bottom line is that Burnside is providing a range of services which are highly regarded as usual. And, the library's a gun place, as libraries go. And so, I think you should take heart. But, my line is that you can do a lot better through your engagement. And, there's other ways to do it informally. And I just wish that you can put a bit of time into that in an informal basis to try to prove that. Thank you.
Okay, we've probably got time for one more question. Last one.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, we'll finish at 8.
Why?
Because we've all got to get home with our families.
Oh, come on.
I just want to pick up on Ron's point about communication. I mean, I sort of gathered from a bit of body language that my comments might have been received immediately, and that I was really having a crack. I mean, as some of you might know, I've been in council on the Burnside Council for 10 years, and I've got a great deal of pride and ownership for the council. And when council isn't effectively engaging the community as best as it possibly can, that hurts me, and I want to see improvement. Continuous improvement is what it's all about. And the world's changing. We've got to keep adapting to the forms of communication, but the old means of communication aren't there yet. And the demographics in Burnside dictate we've got to really tread a very careful line on how we utilise these new forms of engagement and before we discard the old ones. And I've heard some back chat across the room about the Eastern Courier and people quoting it and that sort of thing. Well, the Eastern Courier has been a great vehicle, and it's been a great backup to direct communication from the council. But certainly my experience, and I'm sorry and pleased to hear that I'm not alone, because I don't think that I was the only one experiencing it. But it's very disturbing that the media coverage in South Australia has fallen so far behind what it was. Andrew Faulkner in his heyday would have been conducting forensic journalism on this council, not just reporting like Councillor Ray said, this council did that. He would have been giving the readers insight into the factional plays and what was really going on behind the scenes, and really providing cutting-edge journalism. That sort of journalism doesn't exist anymore. And we're not getting the important checks and balances in local government that the media can provide. And the council focused on getting through is a big problem. It could be cut back. I mean, I think the amount of space dedicated to the individual councillors, which in my time didn't happen at all, is way out of proportion, and a lot of it's banal. And it's some councillors fall into the trap of being promoting themselves. Throw that things on. If you want to promote yourself as a councillor, use your allowance to do that. So, I think it can be cut back to save money. I think it can be distributed better. And if you take offence at if anyone on the staff or the councillors take offence at that, well, you're missing the point. You should want to communicate with the community as best you can. And if you're getting feedback from someone like me who's relatively engaged, have a keen interest in seeing Burnside succeed, then please take the comments that Ron and I and others have made on board.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, some of you didn't get to ask questions because we've got to wrap up. Meg and I will be staying around, so come and see us after we can write them down, make sure that you get responded to.
Yep.
We'll wrap up right now.
Thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your participation this evening. All of the questions that have been answered tonight or taken on notice will be responded to and circulated on the website by close of play on Monday. Also, any of you that have provided your email addresses this evening will get a copy of all of those questions and answers. As we covered off earlier, all of the questions and answers that have been collated, all of the feedback received during this consultation process will be collated and presented to the elected members for consideration at a workshop on the 12th of June. So we do encourage you to come along and have a listen yourself to that output. As Bernie mentioned earlier as well, there's still time for you to submit any feedback, either through the forms that's in the envelopes provided tonight, or maybe you've still got the form at home, but please fill that out and send it through. The deadline for those submissions is midday on Friday the 1st of June. With that, I'll hand back to Bernie just to close the session. Thank you.